welcome everyone to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Pick them up at ArtistFirst.com. Please send your questions and comments to dj@ArtistFirst.com. Even though they're being stalked by hungry bears, they are here for your entertainment. It's Michael and Margaret Lyons.
We are not, Scott, the audience will be worried. we are not being stalked by hungry bears. There may be perhaps a bear nearby because we live in the woods, and you know where bears live. Bears live in the woods. Isn't that how it goes?
Yes.
Or something about that. Bears do something in the woods that we know of.
Well, we just saw a bear go by.
We just saw a bear go by. It was a big bear. But we're going to be stoic about it.
Okay.
There's a segue. And tonight's topic is from, it's from one of the Stoics. I'm going to go for his name. You guys can try your own pronunciation once you see it on the website, but I'm going to say it's Epictetus. Epictetus? What do you think? Epictetus? That guy, anyway.
Epictetus.
Epictetus, who his mother obviously hated him. Stop. Put that down, Epictetus. This is the kind of thing you cannot yell at your kids if you name them Epictetus because you can't say it.
They give them numbers, like Primus and Secundus.
Put that down, Epi. That would work, I suppose. Anyway, so Epictetus has come tonight into our into the Soul of the Everyman to give us a quote. And as with many of the Stoic quotes, it's extremely pithy and beautiful. And I'm going to read the quote.
Go for it.
Because me and Epictetus are like that.
I see.
Actually, we're more like this. Okay, so anyway, what upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about these things. And we've had, we kind of nibble around a topic like this a lot on the Soul of Every Man, because what he's really saying is also what Tolle says in some regards. And the interesting thing about the Stoics is that a lot of their Marcus Aurelius and some of the pithy things that they talk about are really that you have full control over one thing, and that is what you feel about what's going on. And if you don't exert that control, and the Stoics are all kind of about control, and not necessarily the most
self-control.
Exactly, discipline and self-control. But they exercise their self-control to, in essence, say, as the little monk said, "Is that so?" Not taking the situation and reacting to it or letting the situation drive you, but rather doing what Epi is doing here. I'm not going to even try for his name more than once. Is that rather than get upset about something, realize that it's your judgment about the thing. It's the way you are allowing it to control you or affect you mm-hmm. is what actually is making you upset, and that you have the full power and choice in all free will to say, I'm not going to let it bother me, in so many words. Mm-hmm. Something happens, some small frustration or large, something, you get into a fender bender, or suddenly you get a message in the mail that upsets you or could upset you, or somebody says something to you at work, or whatever it is, some sort of trigger, to use the word that you hear all the time, and the thing about a trigger is it doesn't, in and of itself, it can't upset or affect you. You have to allow yourself to be triggered. You have to allow it within and allow it to provoke. And the key words here are allow. People say, well, I can't help it. I mean, it's so upsetting. I've got to do. And all those things are the ego in essence, telling itself how important it is and how awful it is and how I'm judging this to be bad and that why is it always happening to me and why can't it happen to this one who deserves it much more? And
Well, I think what's fascinating is when an ego is triggered, they go into a rage. It's not a debate or a conversation or a back and forth where you can discuss something.
Right.
There's a statement made. The ego immediately goes into a judgment and says, you're bad, how dare you? And immediately goes into this rage. It's almost like a 2-year-old child.
Well, absolutely like a 2-year-old child.
You're watching this going, so you have never imposed any kind of internal observation mode. You just react immediately. And the control mechanism that comes up is, well, you shouldn't be triggering me. You're making me angry. And it's like, no, you are supposed to be able to handle your emotions.
Well, that the key phrase there is you're making me.
Mm-hmm.
You're making me do this. You're making me angry. You're making me upset. All those things are the truth of the statement is you're allowing something else to control you. But I'm sorry, go right ahead.
No, what I was going to say is that concept of you are making me angry, so I am angry, means that you are taking on the identity of anger without understanding that you are feeling anger. And you are more than just anger. But when you take on an emotion like that, you really lose all reason. It is the emotion that controls you at that point. And you have narrowed your identity only to the emotion. So that kind of an awareness is to be taught and cultured from the younger ones, so that when they, to the younger ones or with the younger ones, so that when they mature, they're aware that this is what they're doing. Because frankly, it means that this is like a bit in a horse's mouth. You can be triggered by anything outside of your control.
And led around.
And led around, exactly. You can be manipulated if you don't take care of your triggers.
But go back a little bit, because what you said was this is what needs to be taught. But elaborate. What exactly needs to be taught to the children?
Oh, the awareness. The awareness that you can have this emotion, and you can experience the emotion, but you are not the emotion. Emotions are meant to be felt and let go, not hung on to. And when you identify with an emotion, you hang on to it, believing that that's the only thing you are. So we've all heard that phrase, oh, he's an angry man.
Right.
And if you think about that, if the person you know that habitually is angry, if they let go of their anger, who would they be?
I think that's part of that is the danger of identifying yourself with an emotion. Because interestingly enough, you said it, emotions are ephemeral. And there's a certain, if you do, there's some study, I've done some study on this, but just in general, there's a certain cycle to every emotion. Among the shortest emotions are surprise. Surprise is an emotion. Among the longest emotions are anger and also sadness. Sadness can become chronic, and anger can become chronic. But it just in general, when something makes you angry, there's an initial, let's say, trigger. Something makes you angry. Something has evoked anger. Then there's what they call the refractory period. And during that time, you really can't be taken out of your anger. The emotion has risen, and it must come to its whatever it has to go through that cycle. That phase has to happen.
An emotion is an energetic charge that comes in, and that's got to be bled off or run its course.
Well, initially it cascades through your body. There's a whole bunch of physiological reactions, but they're long with anger. There's blood rushes to certain parts of your body, et cetera, et cetera. And there's different ones for different emotions, different ones for fear and so on. And then there's this period afterwards where you're still angry, but you're coming to the sort of what they call the cooling off period, or the ramping down period, where you still know that you were angry, but you're no longer in the throes of anger. And that's where if you have a normal angry reaction to something, that's what happens. You're initially triggered, you go up into this refractory phase, and then you kind of slowly fade down. And that has not exact, but it has a defined period in most people. When you become an angry person, you literally, and they've done physiological studies, people who are angry replay the physiological and also the neurological pathways in the brain without any trigger. In essence, it's become a sort of an endless loop.
Stuck.
And you're stuck. And in fact, you can kind of burn, an angry program, sort of an angry subroutine into your brain. So that becomes someone who's quote unquote chronically angry. Oh, this guy is always a crank, always upset, always on a hair trigger, always ready to blow up. There's similar things with people who are they're, let's say we call them clinically depressed. They're always sad. They're always down. They're always on the edge of collapse into basically almost a helplessness or the paralyzing type of sadness. Fear can also become this. People who are always anxious, always fearful, always in a stress type of reaction to everything. So when you identify with the emotion, you're also reinforcing that, and in essence, that's the beginning of this cycle where you then end up living. Tolle also refers to these things as the pain body, and they can be various combinations of fear, trauma or anxiety or stress, anger, where rage and constant upset and constant hair trigger kind of reactions to everything. He had a lot of experience with that with his own parents, his own father. And then there's also sadness, this constant, woe is me, I'm depressed, I'm sad, I feel horrible all the time, I'm always on the edge of collapse, everything, the world is weighing me down. These can become aspects of the pain body, but they're all, and every one of them at the root is the ego getting its energy, which is the body's life force, through these emotions, which is replaying in essence like a parasite, sucking off your energy into anger, sucking off your energy into anxiety and fear, sucking off your energy into sadness. The other emotions don't do that. These three are the big culprits for the pain body. You don't find yourself constantly surprised. That's not a thing. But maybe it is. But or the emotion of happiness or joy. This doesn't. People always say, "Well, I wish I would be happy all the time." You might find it terrible, but in fact, it doesn't have that same sort of reinforcement. You can find people who are generally always upbeat, but this isn't a pathology usually.
Right. Well, they've chosen to enjoy what's around them, no matter what.
No matter what.
And that's why I wanted to bring up joy is not necessarily an emotion.
No. And what Ekman, who did all this basic research, and many others who have followed him have found, is that these are the 7 universal emotions, which you can find throughout humanity with a specific set of physiological and very distinct physiological signs on the face and on the body.
Well, cross-cultural.
Cross-cultural, human, just plain old human.
Cross-cultural and around the world.
Yes.
These are the 7 universal emotions.
Right. And interesting enough, one of them is contempt, and people don't think of that as an emotion, but there's an emotional trigger and an emotional identifiable, physiological, emotional map for contempt.
Isn't that interesting?
Contempt and disgust.
So contempt, disgust. Do you remember the others?
I do. Would you like me to go through them?
Sure.
There's contempt and disgust and sadness, anger and happiness and fear, and
surprise.
Surprise, right? The shortest one is surprise. Those are the 7. And but when you find most ego-driven pathologies are in the fear and the anger and the sadness emotions, and those are also the longest. Just in general, the pattern of emotional anger lasts much longer than emotional surprise or emotional happiness. Disgust is an interesting emotion. We don't need to go into these too deeply, but the point being is that oftentimes these, when these emotions become pathological, what they're becoming pathological on is these sort of fundamental, let's say, prejudicial judgments. The instead of being triggered, the ego, in order to get its hit, it's like a drug addict getting the drug. It needs the anger, it needs the fear, it needs the sadness. In order to get that, it has this immediate, automatic judgment model, which fits whatever is happening, the current reality situation, the isness of now, into one of these 3 things that make up its pain body, its identity body, that it wants to then use to suck off emotion, suck off energy. So you can see it all the time. Something happens. Some little inconvenience happens, and the angry man, or the sad person, or the person who's always fearful or anxiety, will plug that thing into their pathology and say, "Oh yes, I knew this would happen. I was anticipating it. This is going to be terrible, awful. The whole world is going to explode and die, and everyone's going to die, and it's going to be horrible. And I'm going to anxiety. I know this always happens to me. I'm always being put upon. I'm always the worst one. Sadness, or why they're always doing this, right? So it doesn't matter what it is. The thing doesn't matter, as Epi says. Mr. Titus is the way we talk to him about here. But as Mr. Titus says, it's not the things that cause the upset. And notice he doesn't say any particular emotion, just the upset, just the upheaval, the chaos, which is the other thing the pain body loves. It loves chaos. The upset is not because, you dropped a glass and it broke. It's the judgment. Oh, this always happens to me. Everything always happens to me. I'm always beset. Everyone's always against me. I'm so, or this always happens. You're always so fall. You're always so clumsy. You're making me scream and yell all the time.
Well, the judgment aspect of that is seen through those filters. If you look at the emotions in terms of a filter, and you've chosen that particular filter to look at the world through. Yeah. So everything gets colored by the emotion that you may have chosen. I find it interesting that contempt is in there, because you say that the other 3 are the longest lasting, the anger and the sadness, and
I would think contempt has a long profile too. I don't know for sure though. That's why I can't say that that's true, but it may.
Well, I'm thinking that there's a lot, when people get offended a lot of times disdain is the response. And
Yes.
I would put that in the category of contempt.
It is. They're actually the same thing. If you, it's just a different word. Disdain is also just as.
Well, I think of contempt as a higher energetic than disdain.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak to that. There's also a bit of a blend in many people with contempt and disgust, and they're close to each other on the physiological forms either, but there is a very distinct and disgust is the much older emotion.
Well, yeah.
Contempt is somewhat more modern, and disgust.
Well, let me ask you then. So, disgust and contempt are two distinct,
yes,
different.
Completely different.
Okay.
Yes. But they you can see in certain reactions under emotional conditions that there are blends if you have the discernment. So there's oftentimes the highest form of what we call hatred is a blend of anger and disgust.
Really?
Also, yes. And because those two emotions, the disgust is something which is it's an emotion associated with rejection.
Right.
You are signaling to all those around you that this thing is to be rejected. That
right.
This food is disgusting.
Right. Or
this environment is disgusting. There's a terrible, horrible smell. There's death here.
Right.
Disgust
to be
is
rejected.
To be
That's
rejected.
True. That's true.
Contempt also always involves it is not usually you're not contemptuous of food that's gone bad. You're contemptuous of other people. Contempt is normally reserved for those which you identify as individuals who have who are lower than you, generally speaking, or are not of your.
It's like a caste system.
It's like, well, you could a caste system is a system based on a certain level of contempt for those who are below, and perhaps a certain level of contempt for even those who. It's a differentiation of people, and rather
it's always people.
It's almost always people with contempt. You can be contemptuous of others' ideas, but it's usually conceptual more than it is physical. Disgust as an emotion is almost always triggered by the physical. Smell is a big one, or the look of something. Something looks disgusting. The feel of something, it feels disgusting, and you see the disgust emotion on your face. So it's very visceral.
Well, yeah, no, the universal reaction is ew.
Ew, but
it's fascinating.
But it's truly an emotion that you can see across all cultures. That when you present this thing, but contempt is completely cross-cultural. But what evokes contempt is very specific to the culture.
Isn't that interesting?
So you can be contemptuous of a particular gesture, of a particular type of person in your culture, but you won't find that same person will trigger that contemptuous reaction in another culture, because contempt is an educated, judgment-based emotion. It's one of the few emotions which is truly judgment-based. You are making a call. That when you have looked at or absorbed some aspect of this other person's persona, you judge it as being less than, and that's when you get contempt.
Isn't that interesting? So that is something that's run through the society throughout the ages.
Human beings,
it's a human being thing. I don't know if animals ever have contempt for anything.
You do not see it. That's one thing that Ekman has found, is that there are analogs to the emotions of fear and anger in almost all other, let's say, higher animals. Animals that not bugs. Okay, but you don't find the contemptuous mayfly, for argument's sake. but that's a great band, the contemptuous mayfly. I'll have to remember that. Regarding people, and on the higher animals, you can find anger. If you provoke an animal, it reacts in an angry way. It has a very similar
response.
Has a response. And
interesting.
But when you get to things like contempt, you don't find that in animals. It's more of a human thing. However, it's universal among humans.
Among humans, yeah, and that's mostly because we're in relationship.
Yes.
You wouldn't have contempt if you weren't in relationship
with other humans. But it's always a judgment on those other humans that they are not as good as you.
It sounds like a mental kind of ego-centered emotion.
It may be the most ego-centered emotion.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. But to come back a little bit.
Okay,
again,
back.
people are of these 7 emotions. Oh, we're beeping him back. Of these 7 emotions, which are universal, you find the ones that people will latch onto and turn into what Tolle calls the pain body. And they're latched onto them with mental constructs, with judgments, with prejudicial judgments. In fact, oftentimes, when you are in an unconscious state, this triggering mechanism comes in through what would normally be the emotional triggering mechanism. Let me elaborate for 2 minutes. The human brain, in fact, all animal brains are wired to react to things that are threats or potentially, survival characteristics. So every one of our basic emotions has survival characteristics attached to it. Anger is the fight or flight reaction. That's the fear-anger combo. The two sides of those are, I detect a threat, and do I run or do I fight? And if your emotion is to fight, you go into anger. If your emotion is to run, you go into fear. The emotion of surprise is the shortest one. Is that I wasn't expecting that, and it almost always transforms into something else. Surprise to anger. You surprise someone, they get angry. Surprise to fear. You surprise someone, they get frightened. Not often surprise to sadness, but it sometimes happens as well.
Surprise to happy.
Or surprise to happy, which happens a lot. Oh, and then you're all happy. So surprise is almost always a emotion which is brief and sometimes transitions into another one. But all of them have survival level characteristics. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just that the concept of surprise basically is an interrupt of what you've been doing almost habitually. I'm walking along and then suddenly you run into somebody and everything inside of you says, I know that person.
Right.
So I think that's fascinating because surprise is a way to break a habitual pattern.
Or out of your reverie or whatever.
Well, yes. Just it brings you right into the moment because when you're in a surprise, you're taking stock right at that moment.
That's very good.
What's going on?
It brings you into the moment of now. Surprise does.
Yes, and I find that almost redemptive for a number of people.
but all these survival mechanisms trigger. So have you ever been walking along and all of a sudden you instinctively draw back and then you realize why you did. In other words, you've already reacted because your brain is looking for threats. So if you take a thing which is a sock and it looks sort of like a snake and you drag it across the ground through a crowd, you'll see everyone throwing their hands up and rocking back in surprise, and then they'll be either angry or they'll be fearful afterwards because the brain saw that and said snake.
Right.
So that triggering mechanism has been spider, another one, hijacked. You can do this with infants who have never seen a spider before. You show them an image of a spider and they draw back in fear because this is hardwired in the brain for survival.
Interesting, right? So, makes you wonder how that happened.
Well, for survival, it probably is natural selection, in fact. Then these basic emotions, though, have been hijacked by the ego to be used for its own purposes. So your triggering mechanism. Oh, you see Aunt Sally or something, and you say, or you see some situation that reminds you of Aunt Sally, and you plug everybody into that, into the story, into the fantasy, all the anger rises up, all the emotion or all the fear, whatever it is, and you have the whole thing rolling in your mind before you're even aware of it. Before you, in the unconscious world of most people's experience, you're angry or fearful or sad, and you're like, where'd this all come from? But then it's already too late. The ego is roaring along with it. The story is going. You're already judging. You're already upset, and none of it has actually happened. It's all a fantasy.
Right. You're in that physiological response.
Are we in a physiological response now, where we're at the end of the... Well, let's take... surprise! It's the end of the half hour. So let's go back to the studio. We'll listen to a couple of commercials. We'll calm down. And then back on the other side, we'll talk about Epi. Mr. Titus.
Batman Gets Out of Bed is the latest book from Michael Lyons, the award-winning author of There is a Reaper. Featuring 13 original stories, this wide-ranging collection has everything. Forbidden love, gods versus demigods, weird invading aliens, sexy seductive artificial intelligence, and unusual passion between the living and the dead. All set amidst fantastic worlds of pain and loss and boundless joy. From the sublime to the macabre to the bittersweet, The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed will leave you breathless with laughter, brimming with tears, trembling with suspense. Available now on Amazon.com, Google Play, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere.
Moonstones and murder. Real murderers need a heart of stone. Meet Maggie and Mike Heartstone, parents of twin boys, entrepreneurs, and now empty nesters. Mike is retired, not by choice, from his position as chief of police in the picturesque resort town of Hamilton. And now his wife Maggie and her shop, the Cozy Crystal, are their only source of income. When a mysterious killing interrupts Hamilton's famous Springfield Park rock show, the townsfolk, the Cozy Crystal, and their lives are rocked to the core. Can Mike and Maggie figure out who is behind the murderous deeds before the town comes crashing down around them? A touch of romance, a little mayhem, and a whole lot of suspense, along with plenty of comedy and thrills galore. Get your crystal magnifying glass out. It's time for some moonstones and murder. Available on Amazon, Apple, Kobo, and other fine e-tailers in ebook and paperback. Out soon on Audible. Get your copy today.
Rick Riordan fans, love mythology with plenty of action and humor? Destroyer's Blood is for you. The new fantasy novel by award-winning author Michael Lyons is book 1 of the adventures of Devkalion, the Blood series. Follow Dev and his magic sword Betrayer as they are suddenly attacked and forced to return to Olympus to fight in a war they want no part in. The world of men and gods is about to be destroyed by Zeus's ancient foe, and only Dev and Trey can stop him. The conflict never stops, and the amazing twist will have you on the edge of your seat. Act now while the ebook is on sale for only 99 cents. Destroyer's Blood is available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. And while you're there, get the free prequel, It's in the Blood, available for a limited time.
The wait is over. First Blood, Book 2 of the Blood series is out. Your favorite bad boy thief Dev is back, and the beautiful and deadly Trey is right there with him. She is sharp, sexy, and full of surprises. Their adventures continue as a new power arises to threaten the world. The heart of creation is under attack, and time is definitely not on their side as they battle against their enemies' undead hordes. Can they unlock the hidden power that can defeat him, or will his forces draw first blood? Get all 3 installments in the series. Book 0, It's in the Blood. Book 1, Destroyer's Blood, and the new release, Book 2, First Blood, today. Available in ebook and paperback format on Amazon, Kobo, Apple, and most other fine e-tailers.
There is a Reaper is the story of 5-year-old Christopher Aaron and his life-changing struggle with leukemia. Winner of both the Indie Bragg Medallion as well as the reader's favorite silver medal for memoir, There is a Reaper has more than 100 Amazon book reviews and a 5-star rating. It has been described as life-changing, spiritual, a must-read. Just released on Audible and iTunes, this memoir is also available in paperback and on Amazon Kindle for only 99 cents. Get your copy of this life-changing memoir today.
Hi, this is William B. Davis, the actor who plays the Smoking Man, or did play the Smoking Man on The X-Files. I'm also a writer, director, producer, and I am delighted to tell you that you are listening to the ArtistFirst radio network.
Thanks for joining us on The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Let's get back to your hosts, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you very much. And the bear has not returned.
Nope.
And tonight we were talking about what upsets people. In essence, the emotional charge that people will use to kind of react to, and certainly in an unconscious way, live in and identify with, is this, and we just mentioned it as we went out to the break, is this use, the unconscious use of any situational event to start, in essence, an internal ego-driven story, complete with a lot of emotion, sometimes repressed emotion, or emotion that's been kind of been balled up. You know, people, Margaret, we mentioned that, there's the angry man, and you say, well, you have to walk on eggshells, because you say the littlest thing off, and he just explodes, and he's ranting and raving. Well, the reason people are ranting and raving is that internally they have this whole, let's call it a fantasy play, that roars into life at the slightest provocation, and puts the situation, whatever the trigger was, and everyone around them into the roles in the story, and then it just starts to play out. And if these people are of a mind to do so, it comes out. The reaction roars out of their mouth. They act out. They start to, in essence, react as though the situation that's in their head is the reality. And of course, in the reality, in the actual isness of now, something just random, or something quite perhaps innocuous to 99% of the other people in the room, happened to occur. But the unconscious, ego-driven pain body is looking with the same with the same deep sort of scrutiny, unconscious scrutiny, as these survival level emotions do. The same thing that causes an infant to react to a spider. It's looking for this trigger, or maybe a whole bunch of them, but let's say it's one, so that it can steal energy, so that it can start the crank going.
It's looking for a way to exist.
Yes.
And what we see many times is when someone explodes like that, as a response for some random event, that person is bringing that internal turmoil that they're experiencing and throwing it out there. Basically almost trying to get the outside world to conform to what his or her experience happens to be.
Yes.
You know, you're accusing me, you're dissing me, so I'm angry.
You're making me angry.
You're making me angry. And what they're actually doing is they're bringing out that critical voice that they're hearing all the time and projecting it out in the world. Now, their only response is they want that critical voice to stop, as opposed to understanding what that critical voice actually is, seeing it for what it is, and deciding that it can be there, but it's not going to affect me. Because you can never get rid of that critical voice. The world is what the world is. Everyone has their own responses and opinions. You cannot control the world that way. And their internal belief is that all I have to do is stop them from talking and I'll be better. And that's not true, because there will be another trigger and another trigger and another trigger, which is basically telling them that you don't control the world, which then sends them into...
Well, sends their ego into that existential
reaction. It feels like, oh no, I'm in danger, I can't control the world, I'm in danger of losing who I am. But the truth of the matter is you hadn't even taken the first step into claiming who you are, because you've allowed the emotions to take over completely. Or the mind to take over completely. What was that phrase? The mind is a better servant.
Right. That was in that video. The mind is a wonderful servant and a terrible master.
And a terrible master. Well, your emotions are a wonderful servant, but they're a terrible master.
Yes.
And when you realize that is so, I mean, it's a phrase that we've heard before, but when you truly grasp it, you realize that giving over control to any kind of thought concept completely or an emotion completely puts them in charge, and you're no longer in charge.
Well, and you being the being,
your awareness, your consciousness is not in charge, but the rest of you suffers because it's an imbalanced existence.
So let's talk about that for a second in the last sort of 15 or 20. What do you do? You know, when your life is the pain body, when your ego identity, and the cure or the beginning is awareness. And Paul Ekman and Dalai Lama got together, and they found the Dalai Lama specifically talked about awareness as the key element in mastering, or at least in starting the process of taking yourself, your being, back from these unconscious, triggered, ego-driven pain body emotions. The way the Lama put it, and the way Ekman he had worked this out, is he said that the initial reaction, when you're in the unconscious state, the initial reaction is almost impossible to stop. You can get there, but let's say in the beginning, it's almost impossible to stop. So all of a sudden, go ahead.
These are the unwritten programs.
Yes.
Or, excuse me, these are the unseen written programs that are running you. And to be able to see that, to acknowledge it, to understand it, is the first step in being able to claim back your consciousness, your awareness.
And he gave sort of the process, let's say the mechanism that you can use. So since the first thing is very, very difficult, almost impossible initially to understand that you were triggered. The first thing that people normally think when they're in this unconscious state is all of a sudden they're roaring angry. Well, the Dalai Lama says, withhold your action, withhold your mouth, withhold your tongue, withhold your body from doing anything. When anger rushes in and you feel your face purpling, you feel the cords in your neck starting to stand out, or you feel this cascade of emotion, whatever it is, be still just for a moment. You've only just realized that you're in an emotional state. It actually started some time back, perhaps even a few half a minute or a minute ago you were triggered and you're suddenly building up and all of a sudden you're enraged. He says just withhold action, be still, and just look at, become aware of, and identify. Say, there's an emotion here. What is it? I'm angry. And right there, you're already too far because you said, I'm angry. But in fact, just being aware that my ego, me, what I consider me, the little me, the ego me, is trying to suddenly be in an angry state. And he says that's the beginning. You start to just become aware and withhold action. Close your mouth. Close your eyes if you have to. Hold your tongue and feel it. And I think, Margaret, when you're working with the little kids, you say to them when you're angry, when you feel anger rising, let it be. Let it fill you. Give it space, but don't do anything. Don't strike out.
Yeah, you can feel the anger.
Yes.
And if you have to express it, you stamp your feet.
Yes.
Or...
So you can do something to bleed it off.
You redirect it. You have to get through that angry moment. And then you can begin to talk about it. But the first task is to try to make sure nobody is hitting anybody.
And really what you're teaching the kids, and this is what the Dalai Lama is trying to teach now, unfortunately, adults who have had perhaps many, many years, is to become aware. Okay. Aware that your being, your body is in the throes of reaction. Your blood is rushing to your face. Your breath is becoming short. Your eyes are opening up. You're tensing up. You're all these things mean that your body's going into reaction of anger or fear. And right at that moment, unfortunately, what happens to most people is they engage the story, and then the story becomes words or actions, hitting out or screaming or yelling, and unintentional consequences because it's unconscious. You hurt those around you. You hit out. You scream and yell. You become a monster.
Well, it would be very good if we can inject in that moment, just like we were talking before. Surprise happens. Something unexpected happens. And then you wind up falling into one of the other emotions because of the story that you've engaged in. So once the surprise happens, the question in the mind goes, what's going on? And that's when the story pops up. So to train the what's going on into a very still point, and then allow yourself to see much more broadly.
More the reality of the situation.
Well, but that's the training. It's
right.
The surprise, the unexpected, what's going on, and instead of, oh, I know what's going on, that's your ego immediately coming and saying, well, it's this and this and this and this and this.
Judgment. And we should be upset. We should be angry.
And then the story starts. It's like, no. Let's take that purity of the question. What's going on?
Right. And in many ways, to go back to the little monk in that story, the is that so is another way. There's many different ways that you can begin. When the story starts, when someone's telling you their story or your internal story starts, you can also sort of stop it there. You can say, is that so?
That's interesting, because you can always tell when someone is speaking with you and they're telling themselves a story.
Yes.
There's a certain, I don't know how to explain it.
It's airless. It's completely seamless. It's like a play. Everything has to be just as I'm controlling it. I'm moving all the pieces myself. I know is the story part. I know this and I know that, and this is exactly what happened, whether they knew it or not. It's a story.
Well, what I'm trying to say is when you're engaged with someone in a conversation and then they start going off on a story.
Yeah.
And to know when it's a story, okay, because most of us just, this is what you're concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
But when is it a story they're telling themselves, and when is it just pure observation?
Ekman had something, whether it's universally true, but he said the reason when you can tell that this is a story is if you challenge it, if you ask a question, what is the reaction? If it's an observation, if you ask a question, they say, I don't know, I don't know if I saw that, and you say, well, what did this happen? I don't know. But if you say it to a story, the story says, what do you mean? Don't you believe me? This is it. This is what it was. I don't know.
Okay, but see, this is my point.
Right.
This is when the emotion of disdain comes in.
That's a good one.
The contempt. And when that rises, that's when the story that's being told is not manufactured exactly, but it's written in the first person. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, it's all about me.
Yeah, it's not a third-person point of view. It's actually a first-person point of view.
Well,
isn't that interesting then?
Yeah.
So to understand that the story that's being told can be in a first-person voice or a third-person voice.
And you should elaborate the difference between those two, which is?
First person is I. And always from my viewpoint. I see this. I did that.
Right. This happened to me.
Right. And then the third person is observing what she is doing, as opposed to I.
The third person, if you're telling the story in the third person, you're the observer. You said, well, I saw this car came out of the side road and it ran across the street, and then this guy over here, he did this, and this guy over here did this, and then this one came out of nowhere, and I don't know what was going on. And at the end of the day, you're a reporter. You're an observer. You're somebody who was just in the situation and then this happened, and then somebody hit me, and it all happened. You're relating what you saw without the I know why that happened, because this guy saw me and he wanted to get me, and then the other one was talking to me, and I had to tell this guy. It's when it's the I, you're always writing the hero. You're always the one who's at the center of the story, and you're always the one who's the hero or the villain, or they're out to get you, or you're the one fighting back, or they're so that requires a lot of buy-in from the audience. The audience has to the people you're talking to have to agree with everything you say, because you have it 100% right. Everything is exactly as you say. Versus the observer, if you ask a question to somebody who's telling a story in the third person, they say, well, I didn't see that. I don't know. Because you're a reporter. Or that could have happened. You're right. It could be that. You don't get the huge emotional reaction which you get when the first person story says, no, absolutely, they were out to get me, and this was happening. How could you even question my word and not this is? I tell you, that part is the story. Not the report of what happened story.
Well, I've already chewed this over and thought about it from every angle. My evaluation trumps yours. So
I was there and you weren't, and I'll tell you what it was. And
yes, so I'm going, and when you question, there'll be, I've already taken that into account.
Right. Oh yeah, that's the other thing you'll get. You'll get the if you're asked a question in that story, and you try to volunteer any information, no, sorry, no, I don't need that, no, thought of all those things. I was just asking you to buy in, just asking for your acquiescence to my story. It is when you get that same sort of thing, Margaret, is when you hear people's, let's say, ideology. And you say, well, couldn't it be this? And, absolutely not. What are you, crazy? You must be. And then you get the contempt and the disdain, because now you've revealed yourself as being somebody who doesn't believe. You're not one of the body.
Yeah. Well, it's just that there is a certain, as I said, the internal turmoil or debate is thrown out into the world, and they absolutely insist that this is the way it is. But when it's done that way, it is seen through the lens of contempt, because you're actually choosing the emotion that you're going to be viewing the world. And that's fascinating to me, because if you choose contempt as your lens, you are always trying to be superior in some way, shape, or form.
You're always right.
And frankly, is that the way you would like to be looked at? Someone else comes to you and they're going to view you with a lens of contempt?
Well, that's interesting, because that's another way out, is to turn the story around and say what you like to be. But it's awareness. All it requires an introspection. And when you do that, you lower the temperature of your internal room, and you also take that energy away from that ego and that pain body, and slowly, you'll find it easier and easier, and you'll quiet that internal voice.
Yeah,
but what we have to say, though, now is, surprise, it's the end of the show. So, why don't you take it away?
Oh, well, I'm Margaret.
And I'm Michael.
And thank you for listening.